Mark and Emily had been happily married for 5 years. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, excitedly preparing for the arrival of their first child. Mark worked as an engineer while Emily was a school teacher. Their love story had always been strong, and they had dreamed of building a beautiful family together. Emily's pregnancy had been a surprise but a joyful one. When the doctor told them they were expecting, they couldn't hold back their excitement. Mark painted the nursery a soft yellow, and Emily spent hours picking out tiny clothes. They attended every doctor's appointment together, holding hands and imagining their future with their baby. As the months passed, Emily started feeling more tired than usual. She was often out of breath and felt heavier than expected. The doctor reassured her that everything was normal, but something felt different. At her 6-month checkup, the doctor delivered surprising news. Emily wasn't carrying one baby. She was carrying 3. They were having triplets. Mark and Emily were shocked but thrilled. Having 3 babies instead of 1 was unexpected, but they took it as a blessing. Mark joked that they would need a bigger house, while Emily laughed, saying she would need extra hands to take care of them. Though nervous, they prepared for their new life as parents of triplets. Finally, the big day arrived. Emily went into labor earlier than expected, and Mark rushed her to the hospital. Nurses quickly took her to the delivery room, and doctors worked hard to make sure everything went smoothly. Mark waited outside, pacing nervously. He couldn't wait to meet his children. Hours later, the doctor finally came out, smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Mark. Your wife has given birth to 3 healthy baby boys." Mark's heart swelled with happiness. He couldn't wait to see Emily and their sons. He rushed into the room, ready to hold them for the first time. But the moment he saw them, his smile faded. Something was wrong. The 3 babies were adorable, wrapped in soft blue blankets, their tiny hands moving slightly. But they looked different, completely different. They had dark skin, curly black hair, and features that didn't match his or Emily's. Mark's face turned pale. Confusion filled his mind. Emily, still weak from the delivery, reached for his hand, her eyes filled with love. "Aren't they beautiful?" she whispered. But Mark didn't respond. His mind raced. How could this be possible? The nurses and doctors in the room looked normal, as if nothing was unusual, but to Mark, this moment felt unreal. He took a step back, shaking his head. The joy he had felt just moments ago was replaced by doubt, suspicion, and something he didn't want to believe. His heart pounded in his chest. His whole world had changed in an instant, and he had no idea what to do next. Mark stood frozen in the hospital room, staring at the 3 tiny babies in Emily's arms. His heart pounded so loudly that he could barely hear anything else. The joy and excitement he had felt just moments ago had vanished, replaced by confusion and shock. He wanted to believe there was some kind of mistake, but the truth was right in front of him. The babies looked nothing like him. Emily, still exhausted from giving birth, smiled at him, expecting happiness in his eyes. "Mark, aren't they beautiful?" she whispered, her voice filled with love. Mark couldn't speak. His throat felt dry, and his hands were shaking. He took a step back, feeling like the walls of the hospital room were closing in on him. "Emily," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. What is this?" Emily's smile faded. "What do you mean?" she asked, her face filled with concern. Mark's mind raced with 100 thoughts. He looked at the babies again, then at Emily, then back at the babies. They don't look like me," he said, his voice shaking. "Emily, tell me the truth. How is this possible?" Emily's tired eyes widened in shock. "Mark, what are you saying? These are our babies." Mark shook his head, stepping further away. No, something isn't right," he muttered. His chest felt tight, and anger started to mix with his confusion. "Emily, how could this happen? Did you?" He stopped himself from finishing the sentence, but the unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. "Mark, I don't understand. I've never been with anyone else. You know that. But Mark couldn't think straight. Doubt was clouding his mind, and he felt betrayed, even though he didn't want to believe it. He had trusted Emily with his whole heart, but now everything felt like a lie. The nurses in the room looked uncomfortable, sensing the tension. One of them spoke gently. "Sir, perhaps you need some time. This is a big moment for your family." But Mark wasn't listening. His world felt shattered. He turned away without another word and walked out of the hospital room, leaving Emily behind. His mind was spinning, his heart aching, and all he could think about was how everything had gone wrong in an instant. Emily stared at the door, waiting for him to return, but he didn't. Her heart broke as she looked down at her babies, who were sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm that had just begun. Hours passed, but Mark didn't come back. Instead, he sent a message through his lawyer. He wanted a divorce. Emily's hands trembled as she read the words. Tears streamed down her face. How could this be happening? This was supposed to be the happiest moment of their lives. Instead, she was being abandoned with 3 newborns, left to face the world alone. Emily sat in her hospital bed, her mind reeling from the whirlwind of events. The birth of her 3 beautiful boys had been followed by a heartbreaking rejection. Mark, her husband of 5 years, had left her in the most painful way possible. She couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong, so fast. The hospital staff tried to offer comfort, but Emily felt completely alone. They had all left her behind. Her husband, her family, and even her friends, who now seemed to question her after Mark's accusations. All she had were her babies. After a few days in the hospital, Emily was finally allowed to go home. But instead of the excitement she had imagined, she was filled with dread. Where would she go? What would she do? Mark had cut her off completely, and she didn't have the resources to care for 3 children on her own. With nowhere else to turn, Emily called her mother for support. Her mother, while sympathetic, was hesitant. "Emily, honey, I wish I could help, but your father and I have our own problems. We can't take you in right now. You'll figure it out. You're strong." The words stung, but Emily didn't have the time to dwell on them. She had 3 tiny lives depending on her. She packed her things, grabbed the baby's clothes, and left the hospital, determined to make it on her own. She rented a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far away from the life she had once known. The apartment was cramped, but it was hers. It had a small kitchen, a single bedroom, and just enough space for the babies. Emily spent every day caring for them, feeding them, changing diapers, and trying to keep her own emotions in check. As the weeks passed, she found a part-time job at a local cafe. It wasn't much, but it helped with the bills. Every day, she would juggle taking care of the babies and working long hours, barely getting enough sleep. She would come home exhausted, only to wake up a few hours later to feed the babies again. Despite the hardships, Emily refused to give up. She couldn't. She loved her sons more than anything, and she wanted to make sure they had everything they needed. But every day, the pain of Mark's rejection weighed heavily on her heart. She wondered how things could have gone so wrong. The pain didn't just come from losing her marriage. It came from not knowing the truth. Why had this happened? Why did the babies look so different from her and Mark? Emily had never questioned the paternity of her children before, but now it was all she could think about. She spoke to the doctor about the confusion, but they reassured her that the babies were healthy and everything seemed fine. However, Emily's mind couldn't rest. She spent sleepless nights staring at the babies, wondering how their lives had turned into this whirlwind of uncertainty. But Emily refused to let this define her. She was their mother, and that was enough. She wouldn't let her past mistakes, or what she assumed were mistakes, define her or her children. Slowly, she began to accept her new reality, even though the pain was still there. But every day she woke up, she made a promise to her babies. She would never stop fighting for them, no matter the cost. The years passed quickly, but for Emily, every day was a struggle. Raising 3 children alone was never easy, but she had learned to survive. Her life had become a routine, working at the cafe, rushing home to care for the boys, and spending sleepless nights worrying about the future. Even though money was tight, she made sure her children never felt it. She worked extra shifts, took on small cleaning jobs, and even sold homemade baked goods just to make ends meet. Daniel, Marcus, and James were now 10 years old, full of energy and curiosity. They were bright boys, always asking questions, always wanting to learn. But one question always caught Emily off guard. "Mom, why don't we look like you?" Emily had always known this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared. Every time she looked at her sons, she saw the same mystery staring back at her. She still had no answers. Over the years, she had pushed the doubts to the back of her mind, focusing only on being a good mother. But now, as her sons grew older, the truth could no longer be ignored. Then something happened that changed everything. One day, Marcus fell ill. At first, Emily thought it was just a fever, but when his condition worsened, she rushed him to the hospital. The doctors ran several tests, and soon they delivered shocking news. Marcus had a rare blood condition and needed a bone marrow transplant. Emily panicked. "What can I do?" "I'll donate whatever is needed," she told the doctor. But the doctor shook his head. "We need to test you first to see if you're a match," he said. Emily agreed immediately, and the tests were done the next day. She waited anxiously for the results, hoping she could help her son. But when the doctor returned, his face was serious. "Ms. Emily," he said slowly, "I need to speak with you privately." Her heart pounded. "Is Marcus okay?" "Yes, but the test results revealed something unexpected." The doctor hesitated. "You are not a biological match for Marcus. In fact, you are not a match for any of your sons." Emily's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean?" The doctor sighed. "I know this is difficult to hear, but based on these results, it appears that these children are not biologically related to you." Emily felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "That's impossible," she gasped. "I gave birth to them. I was there. I carried them for 9 months. The doctor nodded sympathetically. "I understand. But the DNA doesn't lie. There may have been a mistake at the hospital during birth. Your children may have been switched with another family's." Emily's head spun. A mistake. A switch. Could this really be true? For 10 years, she had loved and raised these boys as her own. Now she was being told they weren't hers. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the painful truth. Everything she had been questioning for years was finally making sense. But if these weren't her biological children, where was her real child? Emily sat frozen in the doctor's office, unable to process what she had just heard. The words echoed in her mind. "These children are not biologically yours." It didn't make sense. She had carried them in her womb, felt their tiny kicks, endured the long and painful labor. How could they not be hers? Her hands trembled as she gripped the chair. "There must be a mistake," she whispered. "Maybe the test was wrong." The doctor sighed, his eyes filled with sympathy. "I understand how shocking this is, but we ran the tests twice. The results are accurate. It's possible that there was a mix-up at the hospital during delivery." A mix-up. A terrible mistake that had gone unnoticed for 10 years. Emily's heart pounded as memories of that day rushed back to her. The chaotic delivery, the exhaustion, the overwhelming emotions. She had trusted the hospital, trusted the doctors. How could something like this happen? But now, the truth was staring her in the face. For 10 years, she had been raising someone else's children. And somewhere out there, another mother had been raising hers. Tears blurred her vision. She looked at the doctor, her voice shaking. "If these aren't my biological children, then where is my real child?" The doctor hesitated. "That's what we need to find out. But first, we should confirm this with more tests. We can check hospital records and see if there were any other mothers who gave birth around the same time as you." Emily wiped her tears and nodded. She had to know the truth. She had to find her child. That night, she sat on her small couch, watching her 3 boys as they slept. They were innocent in all of this. To her, they were still her sons, no matter what the test said. She had fed them, held them when they cried, watched them take their first steps, and celebrated their birthdays. Biology didn't change the love she had for them. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the burning question in her heart. Where was the child she had given birth to? Was he safe? Was he happy? Did he have a mother who loved him just as much as she loved these boys? The next morning, Emily returned to the hospital, determined to find answers. The staff helped her go through old records, searching for any sign of another mother who had given birth to triplets on the same day. Hours passed, but there were no clear leads. Just when Emily began to lose hope, a nurse gasped and pointed to a file. "Look at this," she said. "There was another woman who had a baby boy that same day, but she never had triplets, just one child." Emily's heart raced. Could this be the woman who had her son? She needed to find her. She needed to know the truth. With the hospital's help, she finally got a name. And when she saw it, her hands shook. The woman lived in the same city. After 10 years of wondering, Emily was finally one step closer to finding her child. But what she would discover next would change everything. Emily clutched the paper with the woman's name and address, her hands shaking. She couldn't believe it. After 10 years of questions, she was finally about to meet the woman who might have her real son. A mixture of excitement and fear swirled inside her. What if the woman refused to believe her? What if her real child had grown up not knowing anything about her? Taking a deep breath, Emily gathered her courage and made her way to the address. It was a small house in a quiet neighborhood, not too different from her own. She hesitated at the door, her heart pounding. This moment could change everything. Finally, she knocked. A few moments later, the door opened, and a woman stood before her. She looked to be around Emily's age, with tired eyes and a cautious expression. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. Emily swallowed hard. "Are you Lisa Carter?" The woman nodded. "Yes. Who are you?" Emily took a shaky breath. "My name is Emily. I know this might sound strange, but I think something happened at the hospital when we gave birth 10 years ago. I believe our children were switched." Lisa's eyes widened in shock. "What? That's impossible." "I know it's hard to believe," Emily said quickly. "But I just found out through a medical test that the triplets I've been raising aren't biologically mine. The hospital checked records, and you were the only other woman who gave birth at the same time." Lisa's face paled. She stepped back, gripping the doorframe. "No, that can't be." "Please," Emily pleaded. "I don't want to take anything from you. I just need to know if my son is okay." Lisa stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, she stepped aside and motioned for Emily to come in. Inside, Emily's eyes immediately fell on a boy sitting on the couch, reading a book. He had light brown hair and familiar eyes that looked just like hers. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Could this really be her son? Lisa's voice was shaky as she called him. "Noah, come here for a second." The boy looked up and walked over. "Yeah, Mom." Lisa turned to Emily. You think he's your son?" Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She wanted to hug him, to hold him close, but she held herself back. "I don't know for sure," she whispered, "but I need to find out." Lisa looked at Noah, then at Emily. "How do we do that?" Emily took a deep breath. "A DNA test. It's the only way to know for sure." Lisa hesitated but then slowly nodded. "Okay, if what you're saying is true, we need to know the truth." As they arranged for the test, both women knew that their lives were about to change forever. The truth was finally within reach, but neither of them was prepared for what would come next. The next few days were filled with anxiety. Emily and Lisa had taken Noah and one of the triplets to the hospital for a DNA test. Now, all they could do was wait. Emily tried to keep herself busy, but her mind kept returning to the same question. What if the results confirmed her worst fear? Every time she looked at her boys, her heart ached. She had loved them as her own for 10 years. No matter what the DNA test said, they were still her sons. But at the same time, she couldn't stop thinking about Noah. If he was truly her biological child, she had already missed a whole decade of his life. The thought made her chest tighten. Lisa was struggling too. She had raised Noah as her son since the day he was born. The idea that he might not be hers was painful. She kept glancing at him, wondering if she had missed the signs all these years. Had she been raising another woman's child? Finally, the hospital called. The results were ready. Emily and Lisa met at the hospital, their hands shaking as they entered the doctor's office. The doctor looked at them with a serious expression and handed them the report. "The test confirms it," he said. "Emily, Noah is your biological son. And Lisa, the triplets are biologically yours." Emily felt the world spin around her. She had known this was a possibility, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. Her knees felt weak. Lisa gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The weight of the truth pressed down on them. Lisa finally broke the silence. What do we do now?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Emily wiped her tears. "I don't know. How could they possibly fix this? For 10 years, their children had known only one mother. Would switching them back even be the right thing to do? Noah and the triplets had no idea about the truth yet. Emily's heart ached at the thought of telling them. Would they feel betrayed? Would they want to leave? Lisa looked at Emily with tear-filled eyes. "I love Noah. He's my son in every way that matters." Emily nodded. "And I love Daniel, Marcus, and James the same way." The doctor spoke gently. "This is a difficult situation, but remember, biology doesn't erase love. These children will always see you as their mothers. The important thing now is deciding how to move forward." Emily and Lisa exchanged a look. They both knew that this was only the beginning. No matter what they chose, their lives would never be the same again. Emily took a deep breath. "We need to tell them the truth." Lisa hesitated but then nodded. "Yes, but we have to do it carefully." As they left the hospital, they knew one thing for certain. This was going to be the hardest conversation of their lives. But no matter what happened, they had to face it together. Emily and Lisa sat together in Lisa's living room, their hearts pounding. The DNA results had changed everything, but now came the hardest part, telling the children. They knew this conversation would be emotional and confusing. How could they explain to 4 10-year-olds that they had been switched at birth? The boys sat on the couch, looking between the two women with curious faces. Noah, who had always known Lisa as his mother, sensed the tension. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, looking at Lisa. Emily took a deep breath. "Noah, Daniel, Marcus, James, there's something very important we need to tell you." She glanced at Lisa, who nodded in encouragement. 10 years ago, when you were all born, a mistake happened at the hospital." The boys exchanged confused looks. "A mistake?" Daniel asked. Lisa wiped a tear from her eye and continued. "Yes, sweetheart. When you were born, you were accidentally given to the wrong families." Silence filled the room. The boys looked at each other, trying to understand what they had just heard. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. "Noah, you are actually my biological son. And Daniel, Marcus, and James, you are Lisa's biological children." The room was so quiet that even the ticking of the clock sounded loud. The boys' expressions shifted from confusion to shock. Noah's eyes widened. "Wait, you mean you're my real mom?" He pointed at Emily. Tears filled Emily's eyes, and she nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. I gave birth to you. But because of a mistake, you were raised by Lisa." Noah looked at Lisa, his voice shaking. Does that mean you're not my real mom? Lisa reached for his hands, her own shaking. Oh, Noah, I am your real mom. Maybe not by birth, but I have loved you since the moment I held you in my arms. Nothing can ever change that. The triplets looked at Emily, their faces filled with uncertainty. So, you didn't give birth to us? Marcus asked. Emily shook her head, her heart breaking. No, I didn't. But I have loved you every single day of your life. To me, you will always be my sons. Tears started rolling down James' cheeks. But I don't want another mom. I love you. Emily hugged him tightly. And I love you too. That will never change. Noah looked down, his small hands clenched into fists. So, what happens now? Do we switch families? His voice was filled with fear. Lisa and Emily looked at each other. They had been so focused on telling the truth that they hadn't decided what to do next. Emily wiped her tears and spoke softly. No, sweetheart, we're not forcing anyone to do anything. We will figure this out together. Lisa nodded. We are still your moms. No one is taking anyone away. We just need to find the best way forward, for all of us. The boys were still overwhelmed, but slowly they nodded. The truth had shaken their world, but deep down, love still connected them. As Emily and Lisa held their children close, they knew this was just the beginning of a long journey. But no matter what, they would face it together. The days after the big revelation were filled with uncertainty. Emily and Lisa did their best to comfort the boys, but the confusion in their eyes was clear. They had spent 10 years believing one thing, and now everything felt different. Emily worried the most about Noah. He had been quiet since learning the truth, and she could see the struggle in his face. She wanted to hold him, to make him feel safe, but she also knew that he needed time. The triplets, too, seemed unsure of how to act around Lisa. Even though she was their biological mother, she still felt like a stranger to them. One afternoon, Emily and Lisa sat down together, drinking tea and trying to figure out what to do next. We can't just switch them overnight, Lisa said, shaking her head. It wouldn't be fair to them. Emily agreed. But we also can't ignore the truth. They need to know both of us. After much discussion, they came up with a plan. Instead of making a sudden change, they would ease into it. The boys would start spending time with both mothers. Noah would visit Emily's home more often, and the triplets would visit Lisa. That way, they could get to know each other without feeling forced. The first visits were awkward. When Noah came to Emily's house alone, he sat stiffly on the couch, unsure of what to say. Emily tried her best to make him feel comfortable. She showed him old baby pictures, telling him stories about her pregnancy. I always wondered why you had certain habits, she said with a small laugh. Now I know why. It's because you're my son. Noah listened quietly, then hesitated before asking, Did you miss me? Emily's heart ached at the question. She reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. Every day, even though I didn't know it, my heart always felt like something was missing. And now I know it was you. Slowly, Noah began to open up. He still loved Lisa, but he was curious about Emily. He asked her about her favorite things, her childhood, and what life had been like for her. It was a small step, but an important one. Meanwhile, Lisa was having a similar experience with the triplets. At first, they were shy around her, unsure of how to act. But Lisa, who had spent years raising Noah with love and patience, knew that she had to take things slow. One day, she took them to a park and played soccer with them. As they ran around laughing, something changed. They weren't thinking about the DNA test or the past. They were just kids having fun. And for the first time, Lisa saw a spark of connection in their eyes. The process wasn't easy. There were still moments of sadness, confusion, and even frustration. But little by little, both families started to blend together. Emily and Lisa knew that things would never go back to the way they were before, but they also knew one thing for sure: love was stronger than biology. And no matter what, They would find a way to make this work for the sake of their children. Months passed, and slowly, life began to take on a new shape for both families. The transition hadn't been easy, but Emily and Lisa had done everything they could to make it work. The boys were still adjusting, but there was progress, small moments that showed love was growing between them all. Noah had started spending weekends with Emily. At first, he was hesitant, unsure of how to act around her. But over time, he became more comfortable. He started calling her Mom Emily, which made her heart swell with joy. They cooked meals together, played board games, and even planted a small garden in the backyard. One day, as they watered the plants, Noah looked up and asked, "Do you ever wish I had been with you from the start?" Emily smiled softly, wiping dirt off his cheek. "I used to," she admitted. "I used to think about all the moments I missed. But then I realized something." Noah tilted his head. "What?" "I realized that no matter where you were, we were always connected," Emily said. "And now we have the rest of our lives to make new memories together." Noah nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "I like that." Meanwhile, the triplets were also adjusting to Lisa. They were still closer to Emily, but their bond with Lisa was growing. She attended their school events, helped them with homework, and spent time learning about their interests. One evening, as she was tucking them into bed during a sleepover, Marcus hesitated before speaking. "Do you love us?" he asked softly. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. She knelt beside the bed and held his hand. "With all my heart," she said. "You may not have grown up with me, but I have loved you from the moment I knew you were mine." Daniel and James listened quietly before Daniel whispered, "We love you too." Lisa hugged them tightly, her heart bursting with emotion. She had feared that they would never accept her, but in that moment, she knew everything would be okay. Over time, both families became one. They celebrated birthdays together, took trips as a big family, and supported each other through life's ups and downs. The boys now had two mothers who loved them deeply, and they never had to choose between them. One evening, as they all sat around a campfire roasting marshmallows, Lisa looked at Emily and smiled. "Who would have thought a hospital mistake would lead to this?" Emily chuckled. "Life is funny that way. It gives us challenges, but sometimes those challenges bring us unexpected blessings." The boys laughed and talked excitedly, their voices filling the night air. They had been given a second chance at family, and they embraced it with open hearts. No matter what had happened in the past, one thing was certain: love had brought them together, and love would keep them together forever.